Welcome to Ames Public Library for Genealogy Plus, a program brought to you through a partnership with Ames Public Library and the Story County Genealogical Society. I'm Megan. I'm the Adult Services Manager here at the library. The library's mission is to connect you to the world of ideas, which we do through diverse and inclusive resources and programs. We invite you to join us for future programs, which you can learn more about through our Page One newsletter, which you can sign up for our events email as well. Today's session is being recorded and will be posted to the Ames Public Library YouTube channel after the program ends. For those of you online, your microphones will be muted during the presentation. And if you have questions, just put them in the chat and I'll make sure that they get asked. For those of you in the room, if you have a question, please ask as we're going along and just shout it out and our presenter will repeat the question for the folks online. If you're online and you get bumped out of today's event, just follow that original link and you'll be able to get right back in. So please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Dr. Peter Orazem, University Professor in Economics at Iowa State.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. And also thanks to Mary Lohr, who is the person who invited me and moved to South Dakota, I guess, to avoid the lecture. Although if you're online, Mary, hi to you and Jim. It's we miss you here. And then also thanks to Megan for doing some of the works after Mary left to try to make sure I didn't mess up on getting my materials together. So I'm going to talk about 3 different times that I had Fulbrights that took me to Slovenia. So Fulbright is the largest international academic exchange that the U.S. conducts. And remarkably, it has survived the first round of budget cuts that have occurred in Washington. So the Fulbright program is still alive and well. All the Iowa State students who got Fulbrights to other countries in the last year were able to go. And we had everybody who had a Fulbright fellowship to come to Iowa State, they were all able to come. So far anyway, the Fulbright program is doing well. And the 3 Fulbrights, my first Fulbright was I was 10 years old. My father was a faculty member in agricultural economics at Kansas State University, and he had a Fulbright to go to the University of Naples when I was 10 years old. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. And then I've had 2 Fulbrights to Slovenia, one in 2018, and then Patty and I were able to go last fall. So at this time, we were in Slovenia last year. And that was with the Univerza na Primorskem, which is in Koper, which is on the Adriatic coast in Slovenia. So the context, so I'll tell you a little bit about Slovenia in just a bit. But my parents were refugees after World War II. My mother was 16 when she left Slovenia. My father was 19. And I'll tell you a little bit about the circumstances that led them to become refugees at such an early age. My grandfather also ended up as a refugee. And all of them came to the US after about 5 years of leaving Slovenia. So for those of you who don't, Slovenia used to be part of the former Yugoslavia. So it is let me see if I can get this to work. Maybe not. I'm almost afraid to, there we are. So here's Slovenia. It's about 2/3 the size of Iowa. The population is about 2/3 the size of Iowa's population. So that'll give you a little bit of context. And the rest of former Yugoslavia included Croatia, which goes all the way down the coast here. You have Bosnia-Herzegovina, you have Serbia, you have Montenegro, carved out of Serbia is Kosovo, and then you have now called Northern Macedonia because Greece did not want them called Macedonia, so they said, fine, we'll be Northern Macedonia. It's like high schools in Iowa, right? So we have Northwest Waukee. So that's the former Yugoslavia. But it's probably important to understand that Slovenia is a relatively new country. It became a country in 1991. For most of its history, it was occupied territory. So it was part of the Roman Empire. It was part of the Holy Roman Empire. It was part of the Habsburg Empire for many years, or Austro-Hungary. And then it became part of Yugoslavia after World War I, when they just combined a bunch of countries that didn't necessarily have a lot in common. So for example, Slovenia is atypically Catholic, about 98% Catholic. Serbia is Orthodox. Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo are Muslim. So and it all relates to, at one time, parts of the former Yugoslavia were part of the Ottoman Empire, right? So they would have been under Muslim rule. And so these different disparate countries were sort of put together. They had 3 languages, they had 2 alphabets, they had multiple multiple languages going on. So each of these countries has a different language. And so that's pretty hard to have a country, and eventually each of the republics of former Yugoslavia are now independent countries. So I want to talk a little bit about the Roman background. So, and you can see this in Slovenia, but not as much. So for example, Ljubljana was the city of Emona. And let me see if I have an Emona here. This was near both apartments that we had. So there's part of the old Roman wall in current Ljubljana, but the former city of Emona under the Roman Empire. But if you go down the coast, so along the Adriatic here, you have all of these great places. So this is the Istrian Peninsula, and you see Ravine and Pula here. And then if you go further down, you'll see Zadar, and we've been able to visit those. You can now just cross the border because Croatia is part of the European Union. And so in the past, you had to go through customs in order to go from Slovenia to Croatia, and that is no longer the case. And so this is what some of those places look like. So this is in Zadar. It's the Church of Sveti Donatus. And Patty and I wanted to go to church there on Sunday morning, and it turned out that they had stopped having services there in 1798. So we were 220 years late for Mass. But a lot of these areas became part of the Venice, right? So you'll see little carvings of the Venetian winged lion just carved into buildings as you're wandering around, just to give you a sense as to what the history of the place is. And this is something that they have in Zadar, which is a sea organ. So sort of modeled after a harmonica, the waves come in, and as they go out, it goes through a series of reeds, and it'll actually sing to you. So that's sort of a cool area of Zadar. One of the interesting things about the Adriatic is it is crystal clear. So you can be swimming and you can see all the way down to the bottom. So it's a very clean sea as part of the Mediterranean. And then here, we were having lunch on the way back. So this is the town of Sen. And we're having lunch, and we noticed that there were these Spanish galleons moored at the harbor there. And you don't normally see Spanish galleons, but it turned out they were filming Game of Thrones all up and down the Adriatic. And sure enough, I mean, they had piles of armor there and swords and things. You know, we could have gotten whatever the helmet was. Well, we didn't want to get arrested. But anyway, you get the sense that there's just a lot of cool things to see, and you just have to be open to those as you're going along. This is one of my colleagues at the university. They, you know, because they now have, I mean, number one, they were former countrymen, countrywomen under former Yugoslavia, but some of the countries they get along with better than others. So the distinction between Croatian and Slovenian is not that large. So I can sort of hold my own in Croatia. I can't understand Serbian, and I don't know if it's because I just don't want to, or if there's something else going on there with the language. I can understand Bulgarian for some reason, because Bulgarian and Slovenian seem to be very similar. But anyway, the town of Pula has this magnificent Colosseum. You can see here that they have in Croatian and in Italian, they have Gladiatorska ulica, or the city of gladiators. And so you can wander up, and you're coming in to the Colosseum from this angle as you see that city, and you can see what you can wander around in then as an old Roman city. The city of Ravine, this is the port there, so a lot of yachts. And as we're wandering by, people were getting married, so you can see them getting married. This is the archway into the old city of Ravine, and you can once again see the Venetian winged lion. So you get this sense of history. And the university that I went to was in Koper, but a lot of these cities will have names in Italian, names in Slovenian, names in Croatian, simply because they've been under one of these. So Capodistria is the head of Istria, the Istrian Peninsula. That's its name in Italian, and it's called Koper, which you might think is copper, and it is for the Slovenian name. And this was the university that I went to. And I was working at the business school. Literally, this is the window outside my office at the university. They had the harbor right there, and you could watch them loading and unloading these ships, which were just cool. I don't know how anybody gets any work done, because you'd sit there and you'd see as they're unloading it, the ship is suddenly getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they load it up and get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and then it goes away and another one comes in. And then this is this downtown area of Koper, and you can see this ancient well sitting there. And so once again, from the Roman times to the Venetian times, and then right next to this is this brand new building, which was the University of Primorskom. So my parents came from Seknica. This is Koper. Seknica, place of the church. Now, every place has a church, but I guess they got that name, so they were the place with the church. And my father came from Ribnica, which is the place with the fish. And literally, you could ride a bike from these two. They met in Salina, Kansas. So they would have never met if they were in Slovenia. And I'll give you a few stories about that in just a bit. When we were working, when we had the Fulbright, we lived in Ljubljana, which is the capital city. It's about 90 minutes to get to Koper, so that'll give you some sense as to the geography, or how concentrated the area is. We were in Ljubljana because that's where the statistical office for the country of Slovenia was, and I was doing research on the Slovenian labor market. So my first time in Slovenia, I was 10 years old. My father had a Fulbright to the University of Naples, and there were 7 of us, 5 kids, my mom and dad, and a Volkswagen. So you know you're the kid of an economist if you have 7 people in a Volkswagen, right? So and 2 of us would be in that little luggage thing they used to have in the back of those Volkswagens, if you remember how. And they weren't air conditioned, so I'm amazed that all 5 of us survived. We could have had a pork roast in the back, and it would have been perfectly healthy, I think, by the time we parked. And so here we are in Naples. This is visiting Pompeii. And because at the time, my parents had never been able to go back to Slovenia because my mother, at 16 years old, became an enemy of the state because she was in high school in Ljubljana. They closed the schools. There was a civil war that broke out because Slovenia wasn't particularly enthused about communism. They thought the British, who were parked at the Italian border, would come down and liberate Slovenia, but instead Yugoslavia had been allocated to the Soviet side at Yalta. And so the British parked and let the communists come through and take over the place, and not everybody was enthusiastic. But when they shut down the high school because of the Civil War, my grandparents had told my mom, well, if you can't come home, just walk to Austria, which was about a 4-day walk, 75 miles thereabouts. And when things settle down, you can come back. Well, she left at 16. She came back with 5 kids. My father had been drafted into the partisans, which were the communist forces, and he didn't want to be a partisan, so he left the partisans, which put him on a death list. So then he had to leave, and so he ended up at the age of 19. And then my grandfather was the mayor of this town of 250 people, and all the people who were potentially political threats to the government were also put on death lists. And so he ended up having to leave, leaving his entire family, including my grandmother, to take over the whatever happened in Slovenia. So these are my grandparents, Edvard and Angela Furlan. This is their house. My Uncle Tine still lives in this house. And this is very common in Slovenia. And for genealogy, it's pretty interesting. I mean, if there's a house there, that house, since the time of that house, it will stay in the family, right? Somebody's from the family is going to be right there. And so there's not a lot of mobility. And when we were there, under the centralized system, you were not allowed to have more than 10 hectares, which is roughly 24 acres. If you had more than that, they confiscated your land. So my grandfather, they had 10 hectares. Well, as you might guess, that would be a relatively small farm here in Iowa, so you don't have a lot of capital when you're farming a relatively small farm. And so this is what we helped them do. 10 years old, I got to go and help hay for the cattle that they had. So this is my grandfather sharpening a scythe. This is my aunt Zofia, who is raking, and then you haul it on top of a wagon, and I got to be the person. You don't see me. I'm right here stomping on the hay. That was my job. It was a great job. And then you would put it in a kazots to dry. So you can still see these as you travel around Slovenia, are these hay racks that still date back hundreds of years. They probably had to replace some parts at some point, but you get a sense as to what the infrastructure was like. So this is as you might guess, 10 hectares. Everybody is a part-time farmer. They have to have other jobs. So my grandfather would sell milk. So he's milking the cow. This is my Uncle Tine. They were butchers. My grandfather was also a tanner. So before World War II, he wanted to start a grocery store, and he had a tanning operation. The government confiscated all of his tanning equipment, so he gradually had to rebuild his tanning business with all new stuff at that point. And this is Tina now. So he's, what is he, maybe 78 years old, somewhere in there. He's still farming. This is my Aunt Olga. This is their daughter, Tina, and this is my daughter, Katie. And they look like sisters, right? So anyway, there. And this is my grandmother. She's making bread here. So the first thing that happened was, so they're using wood, as you can tell from the house. They were wood-fired stoves. And we kids got so excited about the wood stove that we just piled it full of wood. She had to wait 2 days to bake the bread because it was so hot. So they had to wait for it to get to the right temperature. My grandfather, so this is my father's father, was the youngest in his family, so he did not inherit the farm, but he was rather ambitious, so he was able to build a house in 1930. So you can see that, and MO is for Marco Orazem. And this was the house in Ribnica. So there's a river that comes through. This is a couple miles from my grandfather's house. Here is their kazots. And so my grandfather was a peddler. And so he spoke German. He was the most educated person in the town. He had a 10th grade education, so he spoke both German and Slovenian. And so he would sell dry goods that were manufactured in the area with a lot of wood. So Ribnica was known for its handicrafts. Suha roba are dry goods. So he would walk and train to Austria and go door to door selling dry goods. And this is how they would do it. This is a painting by a famous Slovenian painter, and you can see what a peddler would look like. So because he was relatively educated and he could speak German, he had done very well. Even though he did not inherit the land, he had gotten up to 35 hectares. And so roughly half of his property was confiscated by the government because you couldn't have more than 10 hectares. So that was what happened to him. So he was mayor of Dolenje Vas. As a result, he had to leave the country. My grandfather, Furlan, had all these investments that ended up being confiscated. My dad was in high school, had just finished high school, and because he had left the partisans, he was on a death list, so he had to leave. And my mother just had to leave because she was stuck in high school, couldn't get home, and left, assuming that she would be able to leave. So just to put this in context, Slovenia became under Italian occupation in 1941 at the beginning of World War II. By 1945, the Italians had capitulated, the Germans were exiting, and that is when my grandfather and my mother and father left Slovenia. So this is where my mother ended up. So this is the refugee camp in, it turns out to be near Lienz. You can see these mountains behind there. And this is my mother's high school graduation in the refugee camp. So this is my mother right here. And she never really talked very much about this. So what I was able to do is to hunt down these pictures that she had after she passed. And because of this shape of this mountain, I know this is where the refugee camp was. Now, my father, it turns out that the Slovenian refugees, Austria was, devastated after World War II. They didn't want Slovenian refugees competing with Austrians for low-skilled labor. And so the UN decided, well, if they have a high school degree, they can go to college. So that's how you went to college, because they didn't want you working low-skilled jobs. And so my dad ends up going to the University of Graz. Graz is the second largest city in Austria. And this is what the city looks like. It's much larger than anything my dad would have ever seen growing up. It's a relatively wealthy city. But my dad didn't leave a whole lot of information either, but we found an online diary of one of the people who had been a refugee who had been at Graz, and they listed the address. And it turned out that this is right next door to an old Hitler Youth hostel that became the residency for all these Slovenian and other refugees who had been part of this UN program to allow people to go to college. So my dad, he never assumed he would go to college, so then he had to pick a degree. And he said, well, I'll do agronomy. But it turned out that the agronomy department was in the Soviet-held sector of Vienna. So Vienna had been partitioned into 4 parts, and my dad didn't want to go into the Soviet-held sector of Vienna, so he picked the major that would have the most credits that would transfer into agronomy if and when the Soviets left. and that turned out to be economics. And so that's how my dad became an economist, by not wanting to, fleeing the communist influences of agronomy or something like that. But my dad tells this story about how every day they would go to this monastery and they would serve as altar boys. And then on the way back, they had a big orchard on the way back, and they would just they'd have one pair of coveralls, and they would just fill the coveralls with apples that they would pilfer from the orchard of the monastery. And so they're, of course, they're walking like this, and it's a real steep hill here from this is sort of at the top of the hill, and this is right at the bottom of that hill, and you can still see a wooded area behind there, although it's no longer an orchard. And one of the priests saw them, and so they were trying to run away, and what they ended up doing was rolling all the way back down the hill. And he said it took 2.5 weeks for all the bruises from those apples to leave. So this is where my father was a altar boy. Whoops. Okay, now, genealogy, I'm not a genealogy person. I do what I can, but we were really curious about who else we had, because my parents really didn't talk very much. We knew our grandparents, and that was sort of it. But it turns out that because people don't move a lot, there was a house there. It turns out all the Furlans are in Cerknica. You can go 150 years back, and nobody married anybody that wasn't within walking distance. I mean, I come from a long line of inbreeding. So that makes it a lot easier to do genealogy. You just walk to the cemetery and you have all the Furlans. It turns out that you go back 150 years, and the Furlans who were in Cerknica came from Vipava, which is in the wine-growing region in western Slovenia. And if you go to Vipava now, there are 3 different wineries called Furlan. There are 3 different Furlan families who have wineries. And if you cross the border into Italy, there's a region of northern Italy called Furlania, the Friuli region of northern Italy. There's a Furlan line there. So apparently they fled Vipava because they didn't want wine or something like that. They, tired of the grape industry or something like that. But this is where my dad was born. So my dad was born in Dolenjevas. And we could trace back on the Orazem side relatively well. But once again, everybody is within this region where you could walk, to date. Nobody had cars. And if you go online, they have the church records for the Archbishopric of Ljubljana, if they still exist. And so we were able to hunt down Dolenjevas, which is roughly here, number 19, I guess, if you kept going down. The problem is that not all of the records are in existence. So this is the Dolenjevas. So Blata is mud. That's one part of the family. Dolenjevas was the place in the country near Ribnica. Prigorica is right before the mountain. Pri is before. Gorica is mountain. And Rakitnica, I have no idea. And all the records are in German because it's the Austrian, the Habsburg Empire, and Slovenian. Oh, come on. And so these are the records that they have. So the Krstna knjigas are the baptismal records. The Mariška knjiga are the death records, and the Poročna knjiga are the marriage records. And you can see that not all of them exist because churches would burn down on occasion, too many candles or something. And my grandmother was born in 1904. My grandfather was born in 1898. So we could find my grandfather online, but we couldn't find my grandmother online. So we didn't know anything about my grandmother other than her last name was Merhar. So I thought, okay, how many Merhars can there possibly be? So I figured if she wasn't like the the oldest, if she was, if she had older kids, there must be other Merhars somewhere in the baptismal records, and I could find maybe who the parents might be. And these were the Merhars I found in the Dolenia Vas church records who could plausibly have been her parents. And you can see they're all born. This is how many kids of different Merhars were born between this should have been 1889. But anyway, you get an idea as to how many Merhars there are. Turned out none of these turned out to be her parents. So one of the things, because we're in Slovenia, people had hand copied the records of the church records. And so if you're physically in Slovenia, you can find a hand copy of the original record. So this is my father's birth. We never knew he was called Marcus. We always thought it was Marco. But here he is, and his father was Marcus Orazem, and his mother was Ils, except it's spelled Ilets here. And this is my grandmother's hand-copied record that existed in Ljubljana. We were able to find it. So it turns out her father was Franz Merhar, and her mother was Johanna Ilz. So both my great-grandparents were Ilzes. So that tells you something about, they're probably cousins. I don't want to get too much into the details here. Anyway, and then I was able to figure out, okay, this is Franz Orazem, and these were his parents. But he was born in 1853, and if you go back to the information on the records, we're sort of stuck there. So we're not sure. We'll have to go back and hope that they've hand copied some of the birth records in order to go back any farther than that. So Fulbrights. So I got a Fulbright in 2018. I just finished city council. When I was in city council, I couldn't do anything. I mean, I was hearing names for that 8-year period, and I'd always wanted to do a Fulbright, so I happened to get a Fulbright. So I was able to go to Slovenia in 2018. This was the first day we were in Slovenia, and I thought this was a good omen. So this is the river, the Ljubljanica River that goes through the middle of Ljubljana. At the top here, I think we'll be able to show you in just a bit, there's a castle at the top, and it's kind of a charming looking city. It was not destroyed during the war, so it's a nice place. Our first apartment was in an old tobacco factory in the middle of Slovenia. So under the Habsburg Empire, Ljubljana had the tobacco factory for the Habsburg Empire. And this is what it looked like. So these are women who are rolling cigars or cigarettes. And this is what our apartment ended up look like. So this is what the place looks like now. They've carved it into apartments. Because they weren't built in apartments, they had these very high ceilings here. So they would divide this in half. And so an apartment was like an old room with floors that they carved into the old building. And so, for example, the windows in our building were, half of the window was on the first floor and half of the window was on the second floor. Zoning is a little bit lax, I think, in some of these old buildings. And this is what, this is what the little bar and restaurant in there. And this, by the way, says, "Why are you that way? Zakaj si tak?" Our second apartment, this is the view outside our second apartment. So here's the castle at the top. We're in the Trnovo region of Ljubljana, which was where they had quarantined smallpox in the late 1800s. And so they have various carvings or statues that are carved into the walls here from that era where people would use the icons, hopefully, as prayer for surviving the plague. And so that was the region that we're in now. It turned out we were there at this time last year. They started the Christmas markets. So this is the Ljubljanica River in downtown Ljubljana, and they have their own two swans that just float up and down the river. Lake Laverne, we lost one swan, and the other one, I think, has been given the year off. Hopefully we get our swans back. But this is what the downtown looks like. Ljubljana's mascot are these dragons. So this is the dragon bridge. Zmaj is a dragon. They have a daily market, so you have a farmer's market every day. People will bring stuff in, and this is what the castle looks like from the city. One of the things, if you're in a Fulbright, you get invited to the ambassador's residence. So this is the ambassador's residence in Ljubljana. It's just cool. I mean, if you want a good gig, become an ambassador. But because I did this, I've briefed the last two ambassadors on the economics of Slovenia, one of the perks, I suppose, of having been a Fulbright there. This is my mother's hometown, and they have an annual, this is like right before Lent, so they'll have these parades, and they have, all these people are wearing these masks, so they're butalci, are what they're called. And so this is the parade that they have. It's sort of like their Mardi Gras. And here's some more of that. They have two witches there. So this is Ursula and this is Lisa. And they supposedly live at the top of the mountain around Cerknica, and I don't know much about them other than they have witches. This was Easter Sunday. So we went to this church in the dark. You march to the next town, and then you turn around and you're walking into the dawn back to the first church. My cousin's son was the organist, and he's really gifted, so he gets to tour through Central Europe with his organ. And this is one of the, what was it called? Anyway, it was, the town had, it was a bishop's town under the Habsburg Empire, so I'll remember the name in a bit. Skopje, thank you. And they'll have celebrations. Not everybody's enchanted with having to wear the traditional outfits. So if it's a feast day for you're going to celebrate, and so that's what that is. One of the most famous places in Slovenia is called Lake Bled. This is a church in the middle of the lake. There's a little island, the church there. It's a good place to get married if you guys are interested. It's just gorgeous, and you can see all these alpine lakes. Tito had a place on this lake. The president of former Yugoslavia, and this is a castle. This is the view from the castle at the top of the lake. So the castle is sitting right there. They've finished the reconstruction of the castle, so it's a nice place. Now this is the one we told our kids. So you'll notice that this was the castle of the knight Orazem, E-R-A-Z-E-M. We are O-R-A-Z-E-M. We told the kids that this was our castle. They just misspelled the name. But you can see where the castle is. It's built into this cave. So it's called Predjamski Grad. So the grad is castle. It's the castle. Pred is in front of, the Yama is a cave. So it's the castle in front of the cave. It's just cool. And the story is that the knight Orazem was basically a pirate. So he would waylay wagon trains that would come in through Venice on their way to Vienna. And that was, that probably isn't, the most great thing that your potential ancestors may have done, although I have no way to find it. It would be great if we could find out this was our castle, though, wouldn't it? I mean, but anyway, so it turns out that they have these caves all through Slovenia. It's the karst region. So if you think about where this would be in the US, it would be like Arkansas, right? They have that same limestone formations, massive caves. And this is one of those. And these cave systems go everywhere. So the Habsburgs decided they want to get rid of the knight Orazem. And so they laid siege to the castle, assuming they could starve him out. But because these caves go everywhere, just to show that they weren't getting starved, in the spring, they sent over by catapult fresh cherries and a side of beef, just to show that they were not exactly having any problems finding food. On the other hand, the people outside were able somehow to get a Confederate inside the castle, and that Confederate, you can see right here, this is the outhouse to the castle. It's right there. And so they send a signal off to the side to say, okay, Orazem is in the throne room, right? And they catapulted boulders into the outhouse, and that's how they were able to assassinate the knight Orazem. He died on the throne, and there he was. This is the most famous cave. It's called Postojnska Jama. You can't actually take pictures on the inside, so we bought these. But, and this tells you something about the cave system. The one that I think, though, is really impressive is called I have to work at this, Shkochanska Jama, Rakoshkosyan, and you can see how massive the entrance is. These are people at the bottom. Inside, there's a full river flowing through the middle of this cave, and this magnificent open area that goes up 16 stories. So as you're walking along there, you're looking 16 stories down, and there's an entire waterfall on the inside. You'd think Disney designed it or something like that. It is a magnificent place to visit. So I told you that the Furlans came from Vipava. This is probably a distant cousin who has one of the Furlan wineries, so we were able to. And Patty will never go up this road again. Excuse me. I was giving her directions. She was driving. I said, I think you take a right here. And she ended up in somebody's garage. And then we had to back up, with a car we had just picked up at the airport, right, for the first time. She has to back out of this thing that's like, a foot on either side, down this really steep incline in order to get back to the, anyway, so thank you, dear. We're walking the next time, I think. But anyway, we're able to go and visit one of the Furlan wineries. And this is Vipava, and this is magnificent. So, I told you about the cave systems. This is the river that literally is coming out of the side of the mountain about 10 yards to the left here. And it's coming out with such force that it runs their power system. So this is a hydroelectric power system. And it's literally within a block of the start of the river. Well, it's not the start of the river, but the river coming out of the cave. This is one of my grad school classmates. We got to the top. He's actually then glided, whatever those glider things, he jumps off this thing and goes to the bottom. Well, it's more power to him. And this is a place where they used to have pasture at the top of the hill in the summer, so that was that. And here's one of the things you'll notice is people are always hiking in Slovenia. And then they get to the top, there's a cafe there, and they smoke. And it just amazes me. So okay, we have to be healthy enough that we can afford to smoke at the top of the mountains. That was cool. And that's it. This was literally the last day in Slovenia last year in December. And these are the mountains to the north of Ljubljana, and the sun was coming at them, and that's what it looked like, was this gorgeous reflection off the top of the mountains there. So it's a great place to visit, and that's what I got. So any questions or? Yeah.
Their weather season cyclic, anything like ours, or?
It's they're not quite they're more moderate because you have the Adriatic right there. So literally you can swim in the morning and ski in the afternoon. I mean, it's, as you can see, they have mountainous regions and they have the ocean right there. And so it's roughly a 2-hour drive to go from the ocean to a mountain. So it's you can do that. So we were there in November. I would guess the average temperature, it was usually in the 30s Fahrenheit. And kind of rainy. It was kind of foggy because I think the mixture of warm air hitting the mountains, and so it would be like that. But Slovenia is well known for its skiing, so they have a very good ski team. They're also well known for bicycling. I think if you keep bicycling up these mountains, eventually you get really good. Yeah.
Feel closer to your parents in there, or did you feel any regret that they had left that area? I mean, it just seems so beautiful.
Well,
But you ended up growing up in Kansas?
yeah, I mean, I remember saying at my mom's eulogy that she loved the mountains. And just that year that she died in 2005, 2 people at the University of Kansas had proved that Kansas was literally flatter than a pancake. They looked at the topography of a pancake, which has those holes in it, right? And it turned out pancakes were more mountainous than Kansas. My parents never really felt distant from. I mean, my dad, he could not give you a better compliment than you could be a Slovenian. I mean, so I can remember we were watching the Red Sox play the Kansas City A's. And my dad is like, that Karol Jastrzębski, he could be a Slovenian, the most Polish name in baseball. I mean, so we never felt like, I mean, we were the only Slovenians that we knew, right? I mean, if we were not in, but Cleveland had a lot of Slovenians. When we would go every summer to Butte, Montana, I mean, there were a lot of Slovenians in the mines. If you go up to Minnesota, at Ely, Minnesota, there's a Slovenian choir still there because Slovenians would come to the U.S. and they would work in the mines, or they'd work in the railroads, they'd work in the factories, and then hope that their kids could work their way to a different type of a job. So my grandfather, I mean, I've never talked to my parents about this, so this is just speculation. My grandfather had worked very hard to make a life for him and his family in Ribnica, or Delenjevas. And he comes to the U.S., and I mean, he worked, his house was right next to the railroad. They had a 1-bedroom house, literally within 10 feet, the train was coming by. And he's sending all his money back to Slovenia to support his kids and his family. My grandmother did not come to the U.S. until probably, 3 or 4 years before he died. So she was taking care of all the kids. On the other hand, he was because he had been the mayor. So he was, I mean, no. I mean, I don't think that the issue was that they cared, right? I mean, It's sort of like during World War II. At one point, they had the partisans would blow up a train track or something like that. So the Germans came in and they just took a whole bunch of young men, put them in this room, and shot 7 of them. They didn't care that they didn't have anything to do it. It's just that that's how if they're willing to do that, then you're not going to want to blow up another train, because it doesn't matter who you kill. It's that the people who survive are going to think twice about putting their people at risk. So, but my grandmother wasn't a threat. I mean, was my grandfather a threat? I mean, mayor of a town of 250? Probably not. But because he had to leave because of that, then everybody else is going to go along with it. There's no way the communists would have won an election.
She was in Slovenia 4 years before he died.
Right. He died in 64, 65.
And so and that was right about the time that your family went back for the first time, or they went back after?
She once the youngest kid went, and the youngest kid was my Aunt Franska, who actually came to the US and she got a degree from Kansas State University. She lived with us for a while. Once the youngest kid left, then she could rejoin my grandfather in Montana. So there was no restriction on her leaving. It's just that they couldn't afford to have the whole family go. So they basically lived apart for 15 years.
And did she come because he was in bad health, and
No.
just because of the?
No, he died of emphysema. I mean, my experience with my grandfather was he always seemed to be sad, and
In Kansas, were you in Montana?
he was in Montana. He was sponsored. Oddly enough, he was sponsored my great uncle Ignace Strietznace. And Strietznace had been in the Habsburg army during World War I, and he was a communist. And so he left Yugoslavia because there was persecution on communists. He comes to the US and sponsors my grandfather and my father, who left Yugoslavia because of communism. I mean, but, and my dad got drafted into the Korean War 6 months after coming to the US. And so he wasn't a citizen. And so he was the first person drafted. We have a newspaper photo of him being sworn in as a conscript. He was the first person drafted into the Korean War out of Silver Bow County, Montana. And so he goes to the draft board, and he says, well, I've been drafted. Do I have to accept? They said, are you a citizen? He said, no. They said, well, you don't have to accept, but do you want to become a citizen? He said, oh, yes, because at that point, he's a stateless person, right? When they lost their citizenship in Yugoslavia, they had no country. They were stateless. And so he said, oh, yes, I would like to be a citizen. They said, well, you'll have a great case if you've already served in the military. So he joined the U.S. Army, and that's how he met my mom. So he ended up the day before he was supposed to ship to Korea. So my father spoke 6 languages, including Latin. So he served as the altar boy for the chaplain for the base at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And so every morning he would get up, serve as altar boy. And the day before they were supposed to ship to Korea, the chaplain went to the base commander and said, you got to put this guy in military intelligence. He spoke 6 languages, neglecting to mention that English wasn't one of them. And it turned out that the rules at that time was if somebody makes a stop shipment, or whatever you call the term, everything stops until they can assess your status. And so the rest of his buddies went off to Korea. He said he lost a couple of them, less than 24 hours after they got to Korea. But he ended up being put in military intelligence on the off chance that, we went to war with the Holy Roman Empire. He was ready to interrogate somebody. And so they get put in Fort Riley, Kansas. And there's not a whole lot of stuff to do in Fort Riley, Kansas, but his bunkmate was Marcos Viligoi from Slovenia, who had married Hedda Viligoi, who is my mother's, her best friend from her hometown. So that's how they met. Thanks to the military. Yeah.
Especially now since, Yugoslavia became independent and now they're part of the, or now Slovenia is part of the EU. The country to restore citizenship or dual citizenship to people who were driven out because of persecution.
They made that possible. And so, for example, my father, regained his citizenship, and they were willing to give people money. Nobody really wants the money. The 15 hectares that my grandfather lost, technically they could have, my dad could have asked for restitution, but some of the land was the local school, the city hall, stuff like that. And so he said, well, fine, give me it and I'll donate it back to the city. I mean, he had done very well here. What's interesting, I told you about the refugee camp that my mother went to. So the high school, the people who ran the high school were priests who had run the elite school in Ljubljana. So all the priests were on death lists also. And when I found the old annual reports of those schools, and they have all the names of the people who were in those schools. And so I can do it better for the men because the names don't change if they marry, right? For the women, I'm not as good. But I've been able to figure out what about half of the people who went to this high school did. Atypically, they went to college. So you have priests, nuns, doctors, engineers, lawyers. You have the Archbishop of Toronto. You have people who started ski resorts in Argentina. Most of the people went to Argentina because Argentina did not require a tuberculosis test. If you went to... Yeah.
Magellan Street.
Right. And then Canada, you could go to Canada if you were married, but you had to work for either the lumber industry or the railroads for at least 1 year to go to Canada. The US, you could not be married and you had to pass the tuberculosis test. So my mom emigrated to the US through the port of New Orleans, and my dad through Ellis Island. Yeah.
There is a question online. What's the current economy of Slovenia based on?
The current economy of Slovenia is very integrated into the EU. They're a very educated society. A lot of the old industry has changed, so they're much more upscale manufacturing of the sort that you find elsewhere in the US. So for example, in my dad's hometown, they have 2 robotics manufacturing plants. And one of the things that you can do in Slovenia is you get the degree in Slovenia and you can go anywhere in the EU. And so a lot of Slovenians then will emigrate out. And to some extent, I think that's a policy mistake that they've made. So they make education in some sense too cheap. And so there's a professor at the University of Ljubljana who showed that you can go to university, never attend a class, but your tuition is free. They will compensate you for your food and they will compensate you for your housing. So you can literally live at no cost for about 2 years before they will kick you out of the university for never having attended the university. And so literally everybody goes to the university, okay? But not as many finish the university because there's probably fewer jobs better than being a college student in Slovenia right now. I mean, it's just, they make it too inexpensive and they don't apply as many things. There is the biggest sort of former state-owned factory is their pharmaceutical industry. So they have a very large pharmaceutical presence, and that's a combination of biology and engineering. And then the usual stuff that you would expect. If you take the Austrian, they were always oriented toward Austria because they were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They weren't as oriented to the rest of former Yugoslavia. So if you take sort of what Austria does, it's not that different from what Slovenia does. Yeah.
So you were on that good city council. And yes, did you ever think about your grandpa having been mayor and then being put on the list?
Yeah.
Who compelled you to want to be in politics here after that history?
Well, at the time I was living in Ames, and I think they were I mean, this is perhaps something that I think as Iowa State University, our job is to make sure that we do things that benefit the state as a whole. And we were doing everything to try to prevent economic activity from happening at the time. So I was fishing on Ada Hayden with Steve Sapp, who is in the sociology department. And I had written a few things that pointed out that Ames was growing more slowly than all the rest of the cities in the Big 12, including Stillwater, a town named after nothing happening. And we were the slowest growing Des Moines metro community, and yet people said we were growing too fast. And I said, and so I had this impression that if there's things happening at Iowa State, we want economic activity that builds on having a university here. And apparently a lot of other people thought so at the time. So, but while I was fishing with Steve, he said, "Do you ever think about running for city council?" And I said, "No, not really." "You ever think about being a campaign manager?" He said, "No, not really." I said, "Well, let's just do it." And that's how I ended up running for city council. And there were 3 people who ran, and I got 70% of the votes. So that was cool.
And it just seems like during the 2020, the city council was taking such severe hits. I remember like there being George Floyd protests, and Tim Burton would go just to, show support, and people would criticize. And were you glad you were out of council by then?
No, I think 2 terms is plenty, and I could not have done a Fulbright if I was on city council. I mean, there's just no way. And so, I mean, that was, but when I ran, I put 16 things that I wanted to get done. And then I remember when I stepped down, it was the same time that Mayor Campbell was stepping down. And they had a reception for Mayor Campbell, and somehow they decided to throw me in at the same time, even though she'd served 3 terms on city council and 3 terms as mayor. So she'd served the city for 24 straight years, and I'd been there for 8. But anyway, and it was right in this room, right? So I remember, that's what so they had that, and Steve Schenker, says he's going to introduce me. I said, fine. He said, Peter said that there were 16 things that he wanted to get done while he was on city council, and these are the 2 things he didn't get done. And one of them was, I wanted to connect all of the parks in the city because of the way the creeks are set up. We technically could have unabated paths from one park to another, and you would only rarely have to cross the street because of the way we have things set up, and I wasn't able to get that done. And frankly, I don't remember what the other one was. Yeah.
Well, you did help me because we were annexed into the city, and don't get services from the city. And if you annex them, you're supposed to give them services, and you're not supposed to get services.
Oh, well, thank you. You know, in my neighborhood, so we have like that College Creek that goes through, no, Clear Creek that goes through Emma McCarthy Lee Park. It sort of goes in our backyard, and then it has been undercutting some of the properties for the people in the area. And so they had been complaining about this, and we held a neighborhood meeting, and somebody had mentioned that, and I said, yeah, you know, I'll look into that. And it turned out that the city had already paid for all the engineering for this, and they literally the next meeting, they had a meeting to allocate the resources so they could build these massively large retaining barriers to shore up the land above, above Clear Creek. And so 1 week after that meeting, we approved the funding for that, and I sent it to them, and they thought it was something I had done. And I went, you're welcome. But literally, they had been working on this thing for 3.5 years. I had nothing to do with that. But like, for example, my name's on the pool. You know, I didn't have anything to do with the pool, but they opened the pool when I was on city council. So I get my name on that. I have nothing to do with any of the approvals, any of that stuff. That's not me. I did something with the new water treatment plant. So but if the reason to run for city council is so they put your name on something, you know.
Did your desire to be on city council have anything to do with your grandpa having been mayor?
Yeah. I think about it, yeah.
Let him live vicariously through you?
He would have been proud.